Tonight we are about to step back into a world of opulence, secrecy, and destiny. Imagine waking up in a grand palace surrounded by velvet drapes, echoing marble halls, and whispers of courtly intrigue. This isn't just any palace. You're about to witness the rise of one of the most influential rulers the world has ever known, Empress Eleanor of Britannia. You'll experience her journey from a sheltered child to the commanding figure who would redefine an entire age, and along the way, you'll discover the hidden loves, quiet tragedies, and monumental decisions that shaped her extraordinary life. If stories like this fascinate you, I would truly appreciate it if you tapped the like button and subscribed. It really helps this community grow and brings these incredible stories to even more people. And while you're at it, drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, find your favorite chair, get cozy, take a slow breath in, and allow yourself to sink fully into this immersive tale. Close your eyes for a second and imagine you're there with us, because tonight, we enter the world of Empress Eleanor. The soft chime of a distant clock tower echoes through the corridors of a grand estate. It's early spring in the year 1822, and the morning light filters through tall stained glass windows, casting vibrant patterns onto the polished stone floors. The scent of freshly cut roses drifts gently in the air as staff move briskly yet quietly through the halls, their footsteps muffled by thick embroidered rugs. Suddenly, a flurry of activity erupts in one particular wing of the palace. Servants exchange hurried whispers. A midwife's calm yet commanding voice rises over the tense murmur as a new life prepares to enter the world. In a spacious chamber adorned with golden accents and deep crimson drapes, Lady Amelia of Westhaven clutches the sides of the oak-carved bed, her face pale with effort but determined. The room is filled with a strange blend of fear and excitement, the air heavy with anticipation. After long hours, the cries of a newborn finally pierce the tense silence. A collective breath is released as the child, a healthy baby girl, is carefully placed in her mother's trembling arms. The infant's name is whispered softly, Eleanor Augusta, named partially in honor of a distant ancestor and partially after an Eastern sovereign admired for her wisdom and diplomacy. The nursemaids gently dab the baby's flushed cheeks as the midwife nods in satisfaction. But no one present yet comprehends the magnitude of what has just transpired. This fragile infant will one day sit upon a throne and oversee an empire that spans continents, commanding loyalty, fear, and admiration in equal measure. The decision to hold the birth in one of the palace's lesser-used chambers was deliberate. Unlike the formal birthing rooms of previous generations, this chamber was situated close to the estate's medical quarters, ensuring swift assistance if complications arose. The royal physician, Sir Benedict Wexley, who had served the family through numerous crises, stood quietly in the background, his lined face betraying the emotional toll of countless such nights. As the hours passed, Lady Amelia drifted into an exhausted slumber, while Eleanor was carefully wrapped in silk swaddling cloths embroidered with silver thread. The nursery was prepared with meticulous care. Ivory-painted wooden cribs, soft woolen blankets imported from the Scottish Highlands, and handcrafted toys carved by artisans who specialized in royal commissions. Every detail reflected the immense wealth and influence of House Westhaven, but not all was perfect behind the palace's towering stone walls. Just 6 months after Eleanor's birth, tragedy struck. Lord Frederick, Eleanor's father and the estate's reigning nobleman, succumbed to a sudden fever that spread through the countryside that autumn. His unexpected death cast a long shadow over the family, leaving Lady Amelia a widow at only 24, with her infant daughter the sole heir to the vast Westhaven fortune and title. The funeral was a somber affair. The cold wind tugged at the long black veils of mourners as they walked the stone path leading to the family crypt. The priests chanted solemn hymns while bells tolled methodically in the distance. Young Eleanor, too small to comprehend the gravity of the moment, was carried in the arms of her wet nurse, her wide blue eyes gazing curiously at the sea of dark garments surrounding her. With Lord Frederick's passing, power within the estate subtly shifted. Lady Amelia, though officially the head of the household, leaned increasingly on her chief steward, Mr. Edmund Holloway, a sharp-minded but ambitious man who quietly expanded his influence in the years that followed. Holloway, originally brought on to oversee estate finances, quickly found himself involved in nearly every decision related to Eleanor's upbringing. His voice, steady and persuasive, became a constant presence in the household's daily affairs. It was Mr. Holloway who proposed what later became known among staff as the West Haven Code, a rigid framework for Eleanor's education, behavior, and daily routine. Designed, in his words, to prepare her for the enormous responsibilities she would one day inherit, the code was harsh by any measure. Eleanor was never left unsupervised. Every moment of her day was accounted for. Reading, arithmetic, language studies, moral philosophy, and deportment lessons filled her schedule from dawn to dusk. Even playtime was carefully structured. Eleanor was permitted to interact only with carefully vetted companions, the children of select noble families deemed politically neutral or advantageous. She was never allowed to wander the palace grounds unaccompanied, and when she descended the grand staircase she was required to take the hand of an attendant, regardless of how steady her small feet had grown. Despite these strictures, Eleanor's spirit proved difficult to subdue. In the quiet hours when her tutors had retired and the halls grew still, she found solace in her imagination. She created elaborate stories, acting out entire courtly dramas with her collection of finely dressed porcelain dolls. Her small hands meticulously stitched miniature gowns for her beloved figures, demonstrating an early affinity for the intricate details of court life. Her only true companion during these solitary years was a golden retriever named Percival, a gift from her godfather on her 3rd birthday. The dog, with its soft, honey-colored fur and soulful brown eyes, became her constant shadow. On cold winter nights, Percival would curl up at the foot of Eleanor's canopied bed, his steady breathing providing a comfort that no amount of royal protocol could offer. Though confined in many ways, Eleanor's education was nothing short of extraordinary. She spoke fluent French by age 6, could read and write Latin by 8, and was beginning to tackle the complexities of Greek by her 10th birthday. Her tutors, led by the patient and scholarly Dr. Vincent Hale, marveled at her insatiable curiosity and quick comprehension. Dr. Hale, with his silver-framed spectacles perpetually perched at the tip of his nose, often remarked that Eleanor's intellect rivaled that of any statesman he had ever encountered. While most girls her age in the countryside played carefree in fields, Eleanor pored over ancient texts, memorized political treatises, and sketched detailed maps of the expanding empire. The weight of expectation settled quietly but heavily upon her small shoulders. She was not merely being raised as a noblewoman, she was being forged into a future sovereign, and as the seasons turned, so too did the intricate gears of court politics, positioning Eleanor ever closer to a destiny few would have predicted on the day of her birth. The chill of late autumn swept through the marble corridors of the West Haven estate as Eleanor approached her 12th year. The towering oaks that lined the estate's gardens stood bare, their once vibrant leaves now carpeting the ground in brittle shades of amber and crimson. The servants moved briskly to prepare the household for winter, lighting fires in each chamber and drawing heavy drapes across the vast windows as dusk descended earlier each day. But within the walls of the study hall, the flickering warmth of oil lamps illuminated a different kind of labor, Eleanor's relentless pursuit of knowledge. The girl, no longer the fragile infant swaddled in silks, sat poised at a mahogany writing desk far too large for her small frame. Her quill scratched rhythmically across parchment as she copied passages from ancient legal codices. Around her, towering shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes, histories of ancient kingdoms, essays on governance, and treatises on diplomacy and trade. Dr. Hale, her principal tutor, paced slowly behind her, occasionally peering over her shoulder, his thin lips curving slightly in satisfaction at the precision of her penmanship. His voice, calm but firm, guided her through complex scenarios, challenging her reasoning at every turn, preparing her for debates she would one day face on the grand stage of power. Outside the study, Mr. Holloway observed quietly through the open doorway, his hands clasped behind his back. His dark eyes followed Eleanor's every movement, as if calculating her progress like an investment steadily maturing. His influence within the estate had grown unchallenged, and his ambition remained carefully masked behind a facade of loyalty and service. Yet whispers circulated among the household staff, murmurs of his maneuverings, his strategic alliances with court officials, and his growing sway over Lady Amelia. Though outwardly devoted to Eleanor's well-being, Holloway's true motives were known only to himself. Meanwhile, Lady Amelia found herself increasingly detached from the daily decisions surrounding her daughter's upbringing. The grief that had consumed her in the years following Lord Frederick's death had given way to a kind of quiet resignation. She withdrew into her private apartments, filling her days with embroidery, correspondence, and the occasional visit from distant relatives. The lively young woman who once hosted grand banquets and entertained foreign dignitaries now avoided the bustling court that once defined her identity. Though she remained a presence in Eleanor's life, their interactions grew infrequent, brief, and often formal. When mother and daughter did share time together, it was usually within the confines of carefully scheduled afternoon teas, their conversations circling safely around Eleanor's studies or the affairs of distant acquaintances. The emotional distance between them grew, unspoken yet palpable, as both navigated their roles in silence. As Eleanor's adolescence unfolded under the watchful eyes of her guardians, the political landscape of Britannia shifted in subtle yet profound ways. Across the kingdom, rumors swirled of mounting tensions within the royal family itself. The reigning monarch, King Aldrich IV, now in his declining years, faced persistent challenges from rival factions within his court. His sons, both ambitious and deeply divided, vied for influence behind closed doors, each eager to secure their future claims to the throne. The king's inner circle, a delicate web of advisors, nobles, and military leaders, fractured into whispering camps, their allegiances shifting like sand with each passing scandal. For young Eleanor, these developments were more than distant court gossip. As a member of one of Britannia's most influential noble houses, her fate was increasingly tied to the broader currents of national power. Dr. Hale, ever the strategist, gradually introduced Eleanor to the complexities of these power struggles, presenting her with hypothetical scenarios designed to sharpen her political instincts. "Consider, my lady," he would begin, "if the second prince were to marry into a rival house, how might that alter the succession? What alliances could you form to protect your interests?" Eleanor would pause, her brow furrowing as she calculated the endless permutations, the chessboard of power slowly unfolding in her young mind. By the time she reached her 14th birthday, Eleanor was no longer treated as a mere child of privilege, but as a developing political figure. Invitations arrived from neighboring estates and influential households, summoning her to carefully orchestrated social gatherings, masked balls, charity galas, and hunting retreats where alliances were forged over whispered conversations and coded glances. Her appearances were meticulously planned by Mr. Holloway, who ensured she was always accompanied by trusted chaperones and presented in a manner that highlighted her intelligence and poise. Her gowns, tailored from imported silks and adorned with delicate gemstones, struck a careful balance between youthful grace and regal authority. Each encounter became a subtle performance, a rehearsal for the stage she was destined to command. At these gatherings, Eleanor quickly learned the language of subtlety. Compliments carried hidden meanings. Casual introductions veiled negotiations. The older nobles, many twice her age, spoke to her with a mixture of condescension and curiosity, while their sons attempted to charm her with rehearsed gallantry. Yet, behind her courteous smiles, Eleanor analyzed each interaction, mentally cataloging allies, rivals, and potential threats. She understood instinctively what few her age could grasp. In the world she was entering, words were weapons and alliances were currency. Her most formidable opponent, however, remained closer to home. Mr. Linavi. Holloway's influence continued to grow, extending beyond household affairs and into the realm of Eleanor's future marital prospects. He arranged a series of introductions with potential suitors, each more politically advantageous than the last. Young dukes, counts, and foreign dignitaries were paraded before her, their titles and fortunes carefully outlined by Holloway in private briefings. Yet, none captured Eleanor's interest. She saw in them not partners but instruments, Men groomed to see her as a stepping stone to power rather than a sovereign in her own right. It was during this period that Eleanor began to push back against Holloway's tightening grip. In private meetings with Dr. Hale, she voiced her frustrations with increasing confidence. "Why must my fate be decided by men who see me as little more than a prize to be claimed?" she demanded one evening, her voice steady but laced with quiet defiance. Dr. Hale, choosing his words with care, responded, "Because, my lady, they fear what you might become if allowed to choose freely. Your mind threatens their ambitions." The weight of his words settled heavily upon her, yet they sparked a fire within Eleanor, a determination to chart her own course. As the years advanced, so too did Eleanor's reputation within the court. Whispers of her intellect and composure spread beyond the Westhaven estate, reaching even the ears of King Aldrich himself. The aging monarch, intrigued by the young noblewoman's growing influence, summoned her to the royal palace for a private audience. The summons arrived on a crisp winter morning, delivered by a royal courier clad in navy blue livery, the king's crest emblazoned proudly upon his chest. Eleanor's preparations for the journey were meticulous. Dressed in a midnight blue velvet gown trimmed with silver thread, she rode in a gilded carriage escorted by members of the royal guard. The journey through the capital was both thrilling and daunting. The city's towering spires and bustling marketplaces unlike anything she had encountered within the sheltered confines of Westhaven. Peasants, merchants, and nobles alike paused to catch a glimpse of the young lady rumored to be rising swiftly through the ranks of power. As the carriage approached the palace gates, Eleanor felt her heart quicken, not with fear, but with the anticipation of opportunity. This meeting would mark a turning point, the first of many steps into the heart of Britannia's political labyrinth. The towering gates groaned open, revealing the sprawling courtyard beyond, where members of the royal household awaited her arrival. As she descended from the carriage, the cool air biting at her cheeks, Eleanor lifted her chin, her gaze steady. Whatever awaited her within those gilded halls, she would face it with unflinching resolve. The massive double doors of the royal palace opened with a slow, deliberate creak, revealing an interior of such grandeur that even Eleanor, accustomed to the splendor of Westhaven, paused for a brief moment of awe. Towering marble columns lined the grand hall, their polished surfaces reflecting the light of countless crystal chandeliers that sparkled like suspended stars overhead. Velvet banners bearing the royal insignia swayed gently in the draft that followed her entrance. Rows of armored guards stood at rigid attention, their polished breastplates gleaming beneath the flickering torches mounted along the stone walls. The muffled sound of her soft leather slippers tapping against the polished floor echoed faintly as she was led deeper into the heart of the palace. A steward dressed in deep burgundy approached and offered a respectful bow, his voice calm, but practiced. "Lady Eleanor of Westhaven, His Majesty awaits you in the solarium chamber." Without waiting for a response, he turned gracefully, motioning for her to follow. The route twisted through a series of corridors adorned with portraits of past monarchs, their watchful eyes seemingly observing her every step. The air grew warmer as they approached the solarium, the glass walls allowing the pale winter sunlight to spill across a mosaic floor of intricate floral patterns. King Aldrich IV sat alone near a low table draped in rich brocade, a porcelain teacup poised delicately between his aged fingers. His once imposing frame had withered with the passage of years, but his eyes, sharp, penetrating, and assessing, retained the vigor of a ruler who had survived countless court intrigues. His snow-white beard was neatly trimmed, and his attire, though opulent, bore the simplicity of a man too seasoned for unnecessary extravagance. As Eleanor entered, she lowered herself into a deep, graceful curtsy, her head bowed in practiced reverence. The king's voice, though softened by age, carried an unmistakable authority. "Rise, Lady Eleanor. Come, sit with me." She obeyed, carefully folding her gown beneath her as she took the seat across from him. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable but deliberate, a tactic employed by seasoned rulers to assess the composure of their counterparts. Eleanor, refusing to be the first to break the quiet, met his gaze with calm steadiness, her heartbeat controlled, her breathing even. Finally the king spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "I have heard much about you, child. They speak of your studies, your aptitude for diplomacy, your remarkable independence." His lips curved slightly into what might have been a faint smile or perhaps a warning. "You are not like the other young nobles who parade through my court." Eleanor offered a polite nod, choosing her words with precision. "I strive to serve Britannia with the mind I have been gifted, Your Majesty, and to prepare myself for whatever role the realm may demand of me." King Aldric's gaze narrowed slightly, as though weighing her every syllable. "Ambition can be both a virtue and a vice, Lady Eleanor. Those who rise too quickly often find the ground beneath them less stable than they imagined." His tone carried no hostility, merely the cold wisdom of experience. Yet Britannia finds itself in a time of uncertainty. The balance of power shifts daily, and voices like yours may soon become not only valuable, but necessary. He paused again, allowing his words to sink in. Eleanor sensed that this meeting was more than a courtesy. It was a test, a weighing of her potential usefulness to the crown. The conversation turned gradually toward matters of state, with the king inquiring about her views on trade routes, territorial disputes, and the growing unrest among certain provinces along the empire's eastern borders. Eleanor responded with clarity and measured confidence, offering nuanced perspectives that reflected both her extensive studies and her growing political instincts. King Aldric listened intently, occasionally nodding in approval, occasionally challenging her with probing questions designed to test her resilience. Each exchange felt like a duel of intellect, and Eleanor welcomed the challenge with increasing boldness. As the afternoon light faded into the amber glow of early evening, King Aldric leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "You are remarkably composed for one so young," he remarked. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor, are you prepared for the weight of true responsibility should it ever fall upon your shoulders?" The question hung heavily between them, thick with unspoken meaning. Eleanor held his gaze, her voice steady as she replied, "If service to Britannia demands sacrifice, then I am prepared to give all that I possess, Your Majesty." For a long moment the king said nothing. Then, with a slight nod of approval, he dismissed her with a simple wave of his hand. "We shall speak again." Eleanor stood, offering a final curtsy before retreating from the chamber, her mind racing with the implications of the encounter. The meeting had not merely been an introduction, it had been an invitation, subtle but undeniable, into the inner workings of Britannia's most powerful circles. Upon her return to Westhaven, Eleanor was greeted by Mr. Holloway, whose thinly veiled curiosity betrayed his eagerness for news. "How did His Majesty receive you?" he inquired, his voice smooth but pressing. Eleanor offered only a faint smile. "The king is most perceptive. Our conversation was enlightening." She offered no further detail, leaving Holloway to stew in the ambiguity, his ambitions momentarily frustrated. As winter gave way to spring, Eleanor's position within the realm continued to evolve. Letters arrived from distant lords seeking alliances, while invitations to court functions increased in both frequency and significance. It became clear that her name was now spoken regularly within royal chambers, often in the same breath as discussions of future governance. Some whispered that she might be positioned for a council seat. Others speculated marriage alliances that could cement her influence for decades to come. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her measured demeanor, never allowing herself to be swept by the shifting tides, always calculating, always adapting. Yet beneath her growing public stature, a personal struggle brewed, one that threatened to compromise the careful balance she had maintained. Among the many noble suitors presented to her in recent months was one who differed from the rest. Lord Marcus Everhart, the second son of a lesser but fiercely loyal noble house, possessed none of the overwhelming wealth or grand titles that characterized most of her would-be matches. But what he lacked in station, he more than compensated for with wit, charm, and a quiet confidence that disarmed even Eleanor's most rigid defenses. Their paths crossed during a springtime banquet hosted at the coastal estate of the Duke of Ravencourt. Amidst the gilded halls and vibrant tapestries, Eleanor found herself drawn into conversation with Lord Marcus, whose observations on court politics were laced with a refreshing candor that contrasted sharply with the sycophantic flattery of her usual companions. He challenged her ideas playfully yet respectfully, sparking debates that left her simultaneously intrigued and wary. For the first time, Eleanor encountered a peer who saw her not merely as a strategic alliance but as an intellectual equal. In the weeks that followed, their interactions grew more frequent. Letters exchanged under the pretense of scholarly discourse became increasingly personal, revealing glimpses of vulnerabilities neither had shared with others. Eleanor, who had long guarded her emotions behind an impenetrable wall of composure, now found herself navigating unfamiliar terrain. Could she afford such a distraction? Could she trust him? Or was Marcus, like so many others, another pawn maneuvering toward his own ambitions? Dr. Hale noticed the shift in her focus and offered gentle counsel. "The heart, my lady, often whispers in opposition to the mind. Be cautious that its whispers do not drown out your better judgment." His advice, though kindly delivered, stirred within Eleanor a conflict she could not easily resolve. As summer approached, tensions within Britannia's royal court reached a fevered pitch. The king's health deteriorated visibly, and factions within the council vied aggressively for dominance, each seeking to position their candidate closest to the throne. The question of succession, long simmering beneath the surface, now threatened to erupt into open crisis. And in the midst of this escalating turmoil, Eleanor found herself poised on the edge of destiny, her choices more consequential than ever before. The summer sun hung heavy over the city of Avalon, its golden rays shimmering against the towering spires of Britannia's royal capital. Merchants called out from vibrant market stalls, their colorful awnings flapping in the gentle breeze as crowds thronged the streets. Yet within the marble halls of the royal palace, the atmosphere was anything but festive. A thick, unspoken tension coiled through every corridor, wrapping itself around ministers, advisors, and noble courtiers who whispered urgently behind closed doors. King Aldrich IV's condition had worsened significantly. His once steady hand now trembled as he gripped the arms of his gilded throne, his voice weakened to a rasp barely heard over the clamor of the divided council. Physicians from distant corners of the empire had been summoned, their elaborate remedies offering little more than temporary reprieve from the inevitable. For Eleanor, these final months of the king's reign presented both immense opportunity and dangerous uncertainty. Her reputation had risen to unprecedented heights within the palace. Her counsel was sought in closed meetings, her voice carried influence among seasoned politicians, and her observations were often quoted in chambers where few women were even allowed entry. Yet, despite her growing prominence, Eleanor understood with sharp clarity that her position was precarious. The vultures circling the dying king's throne saw her influence as both a threat and a prize to be seized. Mr. Holloway, always watchful, intensified his efforts to guide Eleanor's future along paths that served his ambitions. He pressured her more frequently now, introducing a new stream of suitors whose familial ties to various council factions could secure political stability, or so he claimed. The latest among them was Duke Lionel of Thornbrook, a man of considerable wealth and military connections, yet entirely devoid of warmth or intellect. His eyes, cold and calculating, revealed his true interest, the consolidation of power that Eleanor represented. At one such meeting, as Duke Lionel droned on about his estates and naval contracts, Eleanor allowed her mind to drift, masking her disdain behind a polite, practiced smile. She recognized these encounters for what they were, battles of subtle resistance, where her weapon was not outright defiance but the careful management of appearances. Only in her private correspondence with Lord Marcus did she allow herself moments of genuine reflection. His letters, filled with equal parts wit and understanding, offered a rare reprieve from the suffocating weight of palace intrigue. He spoke not of alliances or council positions but of philosophy, literature, and the quiet beauty of the countryside they both so rarely saw. Yet, even as their bond deepened, Eleanor remained cautious. The stakes surrounding her future were far too high for reckless sentiment. As the king's condition deteriorated further, factions within the council began to maneuver more openly. Lord Chancellor Whitlock, a sharp-tongued veteran of political warfare, led one camp advocating for a more aggressive foreign policy that threatened to strain Britannia's already fragile alliances. Opposing him was the more temperate Lord Everwin, who sought to preserve the delicate balance of trade and diplomacy that had sustained the empire for decades. Eleanor, though officially neutral, found herself courted by both sides, each eager to secure her endorsement and, by extension, the immense influence she wielded over key noble houses. During one particularly heated council session, Eleanor sat quietly at the edge of the chamber, her presence permitted by royal decree, but still viewed with suspicion by many of the older councillors. Lord Whitlock's voice rang sharply through the vaulted hall, his words brimming with barely concealed scorn. "And I ask again, Your Majesty, how long shall this council be held hostage by the uncertainty of youth and inexperience? We require decisive leadership, not whispered suggestions from those untested by war or governance." His gaze flicked pointedly toward Eleanor, the accusation clear. Before King Aldrich could respond, Lord Everwin rose, his voice calm yet resolute. "With respect, Lord Whitlock, wisdom is not the exclusive domain of those who have grown old amidst their own mistakes. Lady Eleanor's insights have proven invaluable to this council, and dismissing them serves neither the realm nor our sovereign." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, some in agreement, others in disdain. Eleanor met Whitlock's glare with quiet confidence, refusing to allow his provocation to unsettle her. That evening, after the session adjourned, King Aldrich summoned Eleanor to his private quarters, a rare invitation that signaled the seriousness of what was to come. The king's chambers were dimly lit, the heavy curtains drawn to block the setting sun. The monarch sat propped against a mountain of silk cushions, his breathing labored, but his eyes as sharp as ever. "Come closer, child," he rasped, motioning her forward. Eleanor approached, lowering herself into the chair beside his bed. For several moments neither spoke, the silence broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the king's ragged breaths. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Britannia teeters on the edge of a blade, Eleanor. My sons—" He paused, shaking his head. "They see the crown as their birthright, yet neither possesses the strength nor the vision to guide this realm through what lies ahead." Eleanor remained silent, sensing the gravity of his words. The king continued, his voice growing weaker. "There may come a time, sooner than any of us wish, when this council must look beyond bloodlines to preserve the empire." His hand reached out, frail but firm, grasping hers. "You are young, but you are strong. You must be ready, Eleanor, ready for what the realm may demand." Tears welled briefly in her eyes, but she blinked them away, gripping his hand gently. "I will serve Britannia with all that I am, Your Majesty." The following morning, word spread rapidly through the palace corridors. King Aldrich IV had passed during the night. His death plunged the realm into immediate uncertainty. The council convened an emergency session, debates raging over succession, authority, and the preservation of the empire's fragile stability. The king's eldest son, Prince Darius, was officially declared heir, yet whispers of his impulsive nature and reckless policies fueled growing anxiety among both the nobility and commoners alike. Within days, Prince Darius summoned Eleanor to an audience. The meeting was brief, but unmistakably tense. The new king, barely older than Eleanor herself, was tall and imposing, his voice commanding but his eyes revealing an unmistakable arrogance. "Lady Eleanor," he began, circling her like a predator sizing up prey, "I am aware of the advisory role you have played under my father's indulgence. However, my reign will not tolerate divided loyalties or unsanctioned influence." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "My loyalty has always been to Britannia, Your Majesty." Darius smirked, his tone dripping with thinly veiled menace. "See that it remains so. There is no place in my court for divided ambitions." With a dismissive wave, he ended the audience, leaving Eleanor to exit the chamber with the full knowledge that her position, though still powerful, was now more perilous than ever before. As the weeks unfolded, King Darius moved swiftly to consolidate power. Loyalists to his father were replaced with new advisors, many of whom were little more than sycophants eager to please their ambitious monarch. Policies once debated were now decreed, often with little regard for their long-term consequences. Taxes were raised on merchants and peasants alike. Military campaigns were launched against neighboring provinces without sufficient planning, and long-standing treaties were carelessly jeopardized. Eleanor observed these developments with growing alarm, her counsel sought privately by nobles desperate for stability. Lord Everwin, in particular, became a trusted ally, his moderate voice a beacon amidst the escalating chaos. "The king's recklessness will undo all that has been built," he warned one evening during a clandestine meeting in the West Haven Estates library. "We must act, Lady Eleanor, before Britannia is dragged into ruin." And so, as shadows lengthened across the realm, Eleanor found herself standing at the precipice of a dangerous new chapter, a chapter that would demand not only wisdom, but courage, alliances, and perhaps even rebellion, if Britannia was to be saved from the folly of its own crown. The early autumn winds carried a certain sharpness as they swept across the towering cliffs overlooking the Silvermere coast, where the secluded West Haven estate stood in defiant solitude. Within its fortified stone walls, a secret council had gathered beneath the flickering light of oil lamps, their faces partially obscured by the dancing shadows that played across the towering bookshelves of Eleanor's private study. This clandestine assembly was not one born of idle curiosity or political theater, but of quiet desperation. The reckless policies of King Darius had begun to fracture the very foundations of Britannia, and the nobles gathered here understood that silence now meant complicity in the kingdom's unraveling. Among them sat Lord Everwin, his eyes grave beneath his silvered brow, flanked by trusted members of various noble houses whose allegiance had slowly shifted away from the monarchy toward Eleanor's careful stewardship. Eleanor, dressed in a deep emerald gown that reflected both her authority and solemnity, stood at the head of the long oak table, her hands resting firmly on its polished surface. The candlelight illuminated the sharp lines of her face, revealing not a frightened young noblewoman but a leader fully aware of the gravity she bore. As she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and deliberate. "We stand at a crossroads. The king's impulsive wars have drained our coffers, alienated our allies, and stirred unrest among the provinces. If we allow this course to continue unchecked, the realm will fracture under the weight of his ambition." She allowed her gaze to move slowly around the table, meeting the eyes of each man and woman seated before her. "I do not propose rebellion for the sake of personal gain, nor for the petty rivalries that have long plagued this court. I propose it for the survival of Britannia itself." There was a brief but pregnant silence, broken finally by Lord Everwin's measured response. "The cost of open defiance is high, my lady. You will be branded a traitor. Your lands, your title, everything you possess could be stripped away. And yet—" He paused, leaning forward, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "The cost of inaction may be even higher." His statement was met with murmurs of grim agreement from those gathered. They all understood the delicate balance upon which their futures now rested. Across the realm, reports of food shortages, draft riots, and merchant revolts painted a picture of a kingdom slipping toward irreversible chaos. And in the royal palace, King Darius grew more paranoid and vindictive by the day, executing dissenters under the guise of treason and replacing competent advisors with flatterers eager to feed his delusions of grandeur. Among the many complex layers of Eleanor's growing network of allies, there was one man whose position offered particular strategic value: Lord Marcus Everhart. Though still officially aligned with the court, Marcus had, through careful maneuvering, maintained his access to the king's inner circles while secretly feeding critical intelligence back to Eleanor's faction. His letters, written in a cipher only Eleanor could decode, arrived regularly under the cover of innocuous trade correspondence. Through his reports, Eleanor learned of Darius's mounting debts to foreign creditors, the secret treaties he negotiated without council approval, and his increasingly unstable mental state. Marcus's role as both informant and confidant weighed heavily on Eleanor's heart. Their personal bond had grown stronger, fueled by shared ideals and a dangerous intimacy that neither fully acknowledged but both deeply felt. Yet, their alliance carried profound risks. Should Marcus's duplicity be discovered, not only would his life be forfeit, but the entire resistance would be exposed. Eleanor struggled nightly with the dual weight of political strategy and personal attachment, knowing that one misstep could collapse everything they had so carefully constructed. In their rare private meetings, often held beneath the cover of moonless nights in remote corners of the countryside, their whispered conversations fluctuated between statecraft and vulnerable confessions, the line between duty and desire growing increasingly blurred. One such meeting occurred beneath the ancient willow trees of the Westvale Glen, their low-hanging branches creating a natural canopy that concealed them from prying eyes. The night air was cool, the only sounds the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Marcus arrived by horseback, dismounting silently as Eleanor stepped forward from the shadows. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Marcus reached out, taking her hands in his. "The king grows more erratic by the hour," he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. Yesterday, he ordered the imprisonment of 3 counselors who questioned his latest conscription edict. The palace corridors are thick with spies. Even his closest advisors fear his wrath. Eleanor squeezed his hands gently, her expression a mixture of resolve and restrained affection. "Then our window narrows," she replied softly. "We must act before his paranoia consumes the entire realm." They stood like that for several moments, sharing a rare moment of quiet solace before retreating once more into their separate spheres, each fully aware of the escalating storm gathering around them. As autumn gave way to the early chills of winter, Eleanor's plan began to solidify. Through Lord Everwin's influence, she secured the discreet support of several provincial governors who commanded loyal militias weary of Darius's endless campaigns. Merchant guilds, devastated by trade embargoes and punitive taxes, offered financial backing in exchange for promises of economic reform. Even among the commoners, word spread of a noblewoman who sought not her own glory, but the restoration of peace and stability. Quietly, Eleanor's name became a symbol of hope, whispered in marketplaces, taverns, and village squares far beyond the marble corridors of the palace. The final piece of the strategy involved securing the loyalty of the royal guard, a dangerous gambit that required careful manipulation. Captain Julian Hartwick, commander of the palace guard, was known for his fierce loyalty to the crown but harbored growing disillusionment with the king's erratic rule. Eleanor arranged a meeting under the guise of an inspection at one of the outer garrisons, where she presented her vision not as rebellion but as preservation. She spoke of the kingdom's disintegration, of the duty to protect not just a king, but the people and the realm itself. Captain Hartwick, a man of principle and pragmatism, listened intently, his weathered face betraying the internal war waging within him. After a long silence, he finally offered a solemn nod. "For the sake of Britannia, my lady, you shall have my men when the time comes." With the final alliance secured, Eleanor set the wheels of her plan in motion. The uprising would not be declared with banners unfurled in open rebellion, but rather with surgical precision. Key strongholds seized simultaneously, communication lines severed, and the king's most dangerous loyalists neutralized before they could mount an organized defense. Timing was critical. Hesitation would mean disaster. On the eve of the operation, Eleanor gathered with her inner circle one last time within the vaulted chamber beneath Westhaven. The room was tense, but not with fear, rather with the shared determination of those who understood the enormity of what they were about to undertake. As the final plans were reviewed, Lord Everwin raised his glass in a silent toast, his voice steady. "To Britannia, and to the restoration of its soul." Eleanor stood, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her allies. "Tonight, we take a step not for ourselves, but for every citizen who suffers under a crown that has forgotten its purpose. May courage guide our hands and may justice prevail." And as the night deepened, the silent march of destiny began its steady advance. The sky was still cloaked in darkness as the first signal fires were lit along the outer ridges of the capital. A hush had settled over Avalon in the hours before dawn, the streets eerily silent, as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. The carefully coordinated operation unfolded with near-surgical precision. At precisely the moment the cathedral bells tolled the 4th hour, detachments of loyal militia moved through the city gates, their banners concealed, their armor muffled beneath thick wool cloaks. At key intersections, guards loyal to Captain Hartwick stepped aside without protest, allowing Eleanor's forces to seize the critical choke points that would isolate the royal palace from the rest of the city. Communication lines were severed, messengers intercepted, and watchtowers silenced before alarms could be raised. The strategy was not built on brute force, but on speed, secrecy, and the element of complete surprise. Inside the palace walls, the shift was equally swift. The royal guard's most trusted lieutenants, having pledged themselves to Eleanor's cause, moved through the torch-lit corridors, quietly disarming those who remained loyal to King Darius. The heavy footfalls of armored boots echoed through the stone hallways, but no battle cries rang out. No clashing of swords disturbed the air. It was a coup executed not with chaos, but with eerie discipline. Servants and courtiers, sensing the danger, withdrew to their chambers, drawing heavy curtains and blowing out lanterns, unwilling to involve themselves in the deadly chess match unfolding around them. At the center of the palace, within the king's private quarters, the final confrontation was already underway. King Darius, awakened by the hurried whispers of his panicked attendants, stood before the grand windows of his bedchamber, staring out at the distant fires now glowing along the city's perimeter. His face, once flush with arrogance, was pale and drawn, his eyes wide with disbelief as the reality of his unraveling reign came crashing down upon him. Around him, the few remaining loyalists gathered nervously, their swords drawn but their courage rapidly fraying. The heavy oaken doors to the chamber burst open with a thunderous crack as Captain Hartwick stepped forward, flanked by his armed officers. His voice rang out, calm but commanding. "Your Majesty, by order of the Council and in defense of the realm, you are hereby placed under arrest." Darius's voice trembled with rage. "Treason! This is treason of the highest order!" He turned wildly toward his advisors, but their downcast eyes offered no support. The king's once mighty authority had evaporated within the span of mere hours. "You think you can depose me? You think Britannia will follow a child masquerading as a stateswoman?" His voice cracked, desperation seeping into his fury. It was at that moment Eleanor entered the chamber. She wore no crown, no formal regalia, but the aura of command she projected was undeniable. Her emerald gown billowed behind her as she advanced, her expression composed, her voice steady. "You have betrayed the people you swore to serve, Darius. Your arrogance has bled this kingdom dry. I do not act for myself but for Britannia. Your reign ends tonight." The king's chest heaved, his voice lowering to a bitter growl. "You will never hold this realm together. They will turn on you the moment you sit upon the throne. You are nothing but a usurper." Eleanor met his words without flinching. "If I fall, it will be as one who stood for what was just. You will fall as one who sacrificed his people for pride." With a simple nod from her, Captain Hartwick's men advanced, seizing Darius and leading him from the chamber. The king's cries echoed through the marble corridors as he was dragged from the seat of power he had so ruthlessly abused. By sunrise, the palace was secured. Couriers were dispatched to the outer provinces announcing the peaceful transfer of authority under the emergency provisions of the council. The public proclamation was carefully worded to avoid inciting fear, framing the event not as a rebellion but as the restoration of lawful governance. Throughout Avalon, bells rang out across the city, their tones somber but steady, signaling the dawn of a new era. Crowds gathered cautiously in the city squares, their faces etched with equal parts apprehension and hope, as word spread that the tyrant king had been deposed without bloodshed. Within the palace's grand council chamber, Eleanor convened her first assembly as interim regent. The circular room, with its towering columns and stained glass windows, had borne witness to centuries of royal decrees. but never before had it seen a ruler so young, so unprecedented. Lord Everwyn stood at her right, his presence a visible anchor of support. Nobles and advisers filled the chamber, some eyeing her with suspicion, others with cautious optimism. As she took her seat at the central dais, Eleanor allowed a brief pause, letting the silence solidify the weight of the moment before addressing the assembly. "Lords and ladies of Britannia," she began, her voice resonant beneath the chamber's vaulted ceiling, "we stand not as conquerors, but as stewards tasked with the solemn duty of repairing what has been broken. Our people have suffered under misrule, but they have not yet lost their faith in the promise of this realm. It is now our responsibility to honor that faith with wisdom, restraint, and justice." Her words were measured, avoiding triumphalism while emphasizing unity. "We will not answer recklessness with vengeance, nor shall we sacrifice stability for personal ambition. Let the world see that Britannia governs not through tyranny, but through strength tempered by mercy." The room remained silent for a heartbeat before Lord Everwyn spoke, his voice deep and deliberate. "Long live Britannia." The phrase was echoed by others, first cautiously, then with growing confidence, until the chamber resounded with the unified declaration. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor moved swiftly to stabilize the kingdom. The council was expanded to include a broader representation of voices, ensuring that no single faction could again dominate unchecked. Reforms were enacted to ease the tax burdens on farmers and merchants, while military campaigns were reined in, and diplomatic ties carefully mended with neighboring territories. A general amnesty was declared for those who had served under King Darius but had not participated in his abuses, allowing many skilled administrators to return to service and ensure continuity in governance. Yet, even as peace returned to the realm, Eleanor understood that her position remained delicate. Rumors of foreign interference whispered through the diplomatic channels. Envious rulers eyed Britannia's internal changes with suspicion, while exiled loyalists plotted from distant shores. The threat of future conflict lingered like distant thunder beyond the horizon. Through it all, Eleanor leaned heavily on her trusted circle, none more so than Lord Marcus. Though they maintained the necessary formalities in public, their private conversations were filled with the quiet intimacy born of shared struggle. One evening, as they walked together beneath the moonlit gardens of the palace, Marcus paused, his gaze lingering on the reflection of the stars in the tranquil fountains. "You've done what many believed impossible," he said softly, his voice carrying both admiration and a trace of concern. "But power is a burden as much as it is a gift, Eleanor. The world will watch your every step from this day forward." Eleanor smiled faintly, her fingers brushing against his as they stood close beneath the pale glow of lanterns. "Let them watch," she whispered. "I did not come this far to falter beneath their gaze." And as the night breeze rustled through the ancient trees, carrying the faint sounds of the city's cautious celebration, Eleanor Augusta of West Haven stood not as a figurehead propped upon a crumbling throne, but as a ruler forged in the fires of turmoil, a beacon of both strength and the delicate art of survival. The first year of Eleanor's regency unfolded like the careful restoration of a once-shattered mosaic. Each piece, fragile and uniquely shaped, had to be fitted with precision to rebuild the picture of Britannia's strength. From dawn until late into the night, Eleanor labored in the grand halls of the palace, her days consumed by council meetings, legal reforms, diplomatic correspondence, and endless negotiations designed to secure both domestic order and international legitimacy. The weight of the crown pressed upon her shoulders, even though she had yet to formally wear it. The nobility addressed her as Lady Regent, the people whispered her name with reverence and cautious hope, and foreign ambassadors delivered their carefully worded letters not to the king, but directly into her steady hands. Inside the council chamber, the debates remained fierce but controlled. Lord Everwyn served as her chief negotiator, tempering the more aggressive nobles who saw the regency as an opportunity to carve out greater influence for themselves. The merchants' guilds, who had once suffered under King Darius's crushing taxes, now petitioned for new trade privileges, while provincial governors sought increased autonomy in exchange for their continued loyalty. Eleanor listened to each faction with patience, knowing that too swift a consolidation of her own authority might provoke the very instability she had worked so hard to avoid. She offered concessions where necessary, drew firm lines where compromise threatened the unity of the realm, and wove together a fragile but functioning alliance built not on fear, but on carefully managed trust. Beyond the palace walls, the realm slowly began to breathe again. Farmers returned to their fields without fear of sudden levies. Merchants reopened their trade routes without the shadow of royal debt collectors. Artisans and scholars who had fled during the previous reign cautiously returned, drawn by the promise of stability and fair governance. Roads long neglected were repaired, bridges rebuilt, and port cities once blockaded now hummed with the activity of renewed commerce. The great cities of Britannia, from Avalon to North Haven, experienced a cautious renaissance, their streets alive once more with vibrant markets, open-air theaters, and spirited debates in public forums. Yet amidst this fragile rebirth, Eleanor never allowed herself to believe that peace alone would secure her reign. She understood that the world beyond Britannia's borders watched with both suspicion and envy. The neighboring empire of Volstrania, ruled by the ambitious Emperor Gregor, viewed the regency as a sign of weakness, a vulnerable period ripe for exploitation. Rumors swirled of Volstranian envoys secretly meeting with exiled loyalists from Darius's court, whispering promises of support for any effort that might destabilize Eleanor's government. The Volstranian ambassador to Avalon, Count Valken, cloaked his intentions beneath a veneer of diplomacy, but Eleanor read his subtle provocations with ease during their frequent, tense exchanges. In one such meeting, held in the gilded reception hall beneath the watchful eyes of marble statues depicting Britannia's ancient rulers, Count Valken offered his carefully measured words. "Your Excellency," he began with a slight bow, "Volstrania remains most interested in the affairs of Britannia. We admire your swift restoration of order, though some wonder whether such stability can endure without the return of, shall we say, stronger monarchical oversight." His thin smile was polite, but the challenge was unmistakable. Eleanor met his gaze without a flicker of hesitation. "Count Valken, Britannia's strength lies not in tyranny but in the rule of law. Stability is not born from fear, but from the will of a people united by justice. And as for oversight, rest assured no foreign empire will dictate the future of our realm." Her voice, calm yet edged with unmistakable steel, echoed through the hall, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The ambassador's smile stiffened slightly, but he offered no rebuttal. The meeting concluded with the usual pleasantries, but the undercurrents of tension grew stronger with each such encounter. Within the inner sanctum of her council, Eleanor convened frequent strategic briefings. Maps sprawled across long tables marked with colored pins and wax seals, indicating the shifting allegiances of foreign courts. Reports from her network of informants filtered in daily, carried by trusted couriers who risked much to deliver their intelligence. At the heart of this network remained Lord Marcus, whose position as both advisor and silent partner grew ever more critical. His coded letters arrived regularly, providing detailed accounts of Volstranian troop movements, clandestine diplomatic overtures, and the whispers of plots forming in exile courts. In one particularly urgent missive, Marcus detailed a secret gathering held in the southern port city of Eldamar, where Darius's remaining loyalists had met with Volstranian operatives to discuss an armed insurrection. "The seeds of rebellion have been planted," the letter warned. "Volstrania offers arms, ships, and gold. Their plan is bold but not without flaw. If we move swiftly, we may yet uproot this treachery before it flowers." The news confirmed Eleanor's worst fears, but also presented a rare opportunity to strike preemptively. Summoning her most trusted military commanders, including Captain Hartwick, she devised a counter-operation. Eldamar, though distant from Avalon, was still under the nominal authority of loyal provincial governors. Using carefully forged merchant convoys as cover, Regency forces would be inserted into the city under the guise of routine inspections. Once inside, they would simultaneously dismantle the arms caches, arrest the conspirators, and seize any foreign agents involved. Timing, secrecy, and absolute coordination would be paramount. As the operation commenced, Eleanor remained in constant communication with her field commanders, receiving hourly reports within the war chambers of the palace. Every candlelit hour dragged with excruciating tension, yet her focus never wavered. Finally, at dawn 3 days later, Captain Hartwick's personal courier arrived breathless at the palace gates, delivering a sealed parchment with the single word she had hoped for: secured. The insurrection had been crushed before its first spark could ignite. Dozens of conspirators were arrested, including several Volstranian emissaries who had foolishly underestimated the reach of Eleanor's spies. The swift and bloodless suppression of the Eldamar plot sent a resounding message both within Britannia and abroad. The Regency was neither fragile nor unprepared. It was not merely surviving, it was actively shaping the fate of the realm. The people, who had grown weary of endless instability, celebrated the victory with spontaneous festivals. Bonfires lit the skies from Avalon to the smallest villages, and songs of loyalty to the regent echoed in public squares. Still, Eleanor knew better than to mistake this victory for invulnerability. The exiled remnants of Darius's court remained scattered across foreign territories, their ambitions undimmed by temporary setbacks. Volstrania's interest in Britannia had not diminished, but had merely shifted to subtler, more insidious methods. And though the internal unity of her council was stronger than ever, rival ambitions simmered quietly beneath the surface, waiting for any sign of weakness. Amidst these external and internal pressures, Eleanor continued to lean on her partnership with Marcus. Their private conversations remained both a strategic lifeline and a rare refuge from the unrelenting demands of power. One quiet evening, as they walked beneath the palace's winter garden, its evergreens heavy with snow, Marcus paused and gently took her hand, the simple gesture breaking momentarily through the rigid protocol that normally governed their every interaction. "You have stood against storms that would have broken even the most seasoned monarchs," he whispered. "But storms have a way of returning." Eleanor's breath rose in the cold night air, her voice calm but firm. "Then let them return," she replied. "We have faced storms before, we will face them again." And beneath the pale light of the moon, their intertwined hands became a quiet oath, one of loyalty, of courage, and of unwavering resolve, as Britannia's uncertain future continued to unfold before them. As the winter thawed into a cool but hopeful spring, Britannia stood on firmer ground than it had in many years. Trade routes bustled again with foreign merchants eager to regain access to Avalon's markets, and the provincial roads, once riddled with banditry and lawlessness, now pulsed with steady commerce and guarded convoys. In the countryside, farmers sowed their fields beneath gentle rains, and the once starved villages now flourished under newly implemented reforms that balanced taxation with genuine investment in local communities. Public works that had long been abandoned were revived under Eleanor's direct patronage. Bridges restored, schools reopened, and hospitals funded through royal endowments. The air itself seemed to carry a cautious optimism, as though the very land recognized the shifting tides under her measured hand. Inside the palace, the tone was one of disciplined focus rather than unchecked celebration. The council chamber remained a battleground of ideas, but where once voices shouted over one another in raw contention, now there was structure. Lord Everwyn, steady as always, continued to serve as Eleanor's primary counselor in matters of statecraft and foreign policy. Beside him sat emerging voices from previously marginalized noble houses, young barons, merchant representatives, and scholars who brought fresh perspectives to matters of education, economics, and diplomacy. The aristocracy, once dominated by hereditary entitlement, now blended cautiously with an evolving meritocracy, carefully fostered by Eleanor's policies. Her reformist vision was not without resistance. Pockets of old guard nobles still whispered behind silk drapes, their private salons filled with quiet bitterness at the redistribution of influence. But Eleanor's grip remained unshaken, for each reform was implemented with deliberate care, ensuring that no faction ever had reason to feel completely alienated while also never gaining too much ground. Power remained in delicate balance, like a masterfully conducted symphony, each instrument playing its part but always under the watchful guidance of the conductor. Beyond the domestic sphere, however, the world continued to circle like a patient predator. The Empire of Volstrania, frustrated by its failed intervention at Eldamar, withdrew momentarily into silence. Yet Eleanor knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. Volstrania's ambassador, Count Valchen, continued to attend official receptions and state functions, his smiles carefully masking his emperor's simmering ambitions. Diplomatic banquets served as little more than staged performances, where each toast, each compliment, carried layers of calculated meaning beneath polished words. Eleanor met these encounters with graceful but unwavering fortitude, recognizing that diplomacy was simply war conducted without blades. To strengthen Britannia's position, Eleanor pursued new alliances. She opened dialogues with the Northern Confederacy, a powerful union of trading states whose fleets controlled much of the sea routes once monopolized by Volstrania. In a series of brilliantly negotiated trade treaties, Britannia gained favorable tariffs, access to critical ports, and naval protections that dramatically expanded its commercial reach. These agreements not only enriched Britannia's coffers but sent a sharp warning across the continent that Eleanor was neither isolated nor easily manipulated. The Confederacy, long admired for its strategic neutrality, now stood subtly aligned with Britannia's cause, further isolating Volstrania diplomatically. But even as international alliances solidified, Eleanor faced personal dilemmas that no council could resolve. Her relationship with Marcus, still concealed beneath layers of discretion, continued to deepen. His counsel had become indispensable. His ability to navigate both the shadows of espionage and the light of diplomacy complemented her rule in ways no other advisor could match. Their late-night strategy sessions often blurred into intimate conversations, where state matters intertwined with quiet expressions of trust, vulnerability, and a growing affection that neither dared publicly acknowledge. One evening, as they met within Eleanor's private study, a chamber lit only by the soft glow of the hearth and flickering lanterns, Marcus spoke words that shifted the unspoken tension between them into something palpable. "Eleanor," he began, his voice measured but filled with unguarded sincerity, "we have shared burdens that few could understand. I have stood at your side through storms that would have broken lesser rulers. Yet in all our victories there remains one truth I can no longer silence within myself." He paused, searching her eyes. "I love you, not simply as a sovereign, nor as an ally, but as the woman who has carried this kingdom with strength, grace, and an unshakable heart." For a long moment Eleanor said nothing, her breath shallow as emotions warred against her carefully cultivated restraint. She had long known the depth of her feelings for Marcus, but admitting them aloud would shatter the careful wall of protocol and duty she had built. Yet as his hand gently brushed against hers, she whispered in return, her voice softer than the crackling embers behind them. "And you, Marcus. I have loved you through every battle, every sleepless night, and every silent glance we dared not acknowledge." Their confession was not followed by reckless passion, but by an even deeper bond, an unspoken vow that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. Yet both understood the political reality that still bound them. Any formal union would ignite speculation, threaten fragile alliances, and risk destabilizing the carefully balanced factions that had allowed Eleanor's regency to flourish. And so, their love remained veiled, powerful yet private, existing as a source of strength hidden beneath the armor of statecraft. As spring gave way to summer, Eleanor's council introduced one of the most ambitious reforms of her reign, a legal codex that would redefine Britannia's governance for generations to come. Known as the Charter of Balance, this new system redistributed power across regional councils, granting provinces greater autonomy in managing their affairs, while preserving centralized oversight for matters of national security, foreign policy, and fiscal responsibility. The charter was revolutionary. For the first time in Britannia's history, noble blood alone no longer determined one's voice in governance. Merchants, scholars, and even distinguished commoners who had proven their loyalty and competence were appointed as regional delegates. The drafting of the Charter of Balance was a monumental task that consumed countless hours of debate, compromise, and legal refinement. But when it was finally ratified by the Great Council, the celebrations that erupted across the realm surpassed any scene since Eleanor first secured the throne. Church bells rang in every city, choirs filled cathedrals with soaring hymns of gratitude, and in villages where banners bearing her sigil were unfurled, the people gathered to dance beneath lantern-lit streets. For many commoners, it was the first time in living memory that governance no longer felt like a distant force, but something they could finally trust to act in their interest. Foreign courts reacted with a mixture of admiration and unease. The Volstranian emperor, fuming within his gilded war chambers, saw the charter as a direct challenge to his absolutist ideology. Diplomats from neighboring kingdoms sent envoys not only to offer formal congratulations, but to quietly inquire about potential adoption of similar governance models within their own borders. Britannia, once the scene of civil unrest and tyrannical overreach, now stood as a beacon of modern governance, admired by some, envied by many, feared by those who saw such reforms as a threat to their own rule. Despite the swelling pride of her people, Eleanor remained vigilant. She knew history offered no comfort to rulers who mistook momentary stability for permanent peace. Her spies continued to intercept messages from the Volstranian court, detailing renewed schemes to destabilize Britannia through economic subversion, covert alliances, and proxy conflicts along disputed borderlands. The war had shifted from open swords to veiled intrigues. One warm evening, as Eleanor stood upon the highest balcony of the palace, overlooking the glowing city lights of Avalon, Marcus approached quietly. Together they watched the city breathe below, a living testament to their years of struggle and perseverance. "The world watches you, Eleanor," Marcus whispered, "and they will test you again, as they always do." Eleanor's eyes remained on the horizon, her voice steady. "Let them test me. I do not fear the challenges ahead. We have rebuilt this kingdom from ruin, and when the storms return, as they surely will, we will face them not as a fragile regency, but as Britannia united." And beneath the vast starlit sky, their unspoken oath remained stronger than any decree, a bond that would guide them through the uncharted storms yet to come. The summer sun blazed high above Avalon, casting long golden rays across the palace courtyards, where banners of Britannia fluttered proudly in the gentle breeze. From the marble terraces, one could hear the distant echoes of a bustling city at peace. Its markets filled with vibrant colors, its streets alive with the sound of children's laughter and merchants haggling under striped canvas stalls. Yet, within the fortified heart of the palace, Eleanor stood before her council, not with a sense of satisfaction, but with sharpened focus. She understood well that peace was not the absence of danger. It was merely the brief silence between the growls of the wolves that still circled her kingdom. Though Volstrania had retreated from open confrontation, its emperor had not abandoned his ambitions. In border towns along the eastern frontier, strange merchants arrived offering unusually favorable trade deals, only to be discovered later as agents spreading dissent and funding criminal syndicates to destabilize the local economies. Entire caravans of disguised mercenaries crossed neutral territories under forged banners, establishing covert encampments dangerously close to Britannia's vulnerable eastern settlements. Even more insidious was the influx of counterfeit currency flooding Britannia's markets, subtly undermining confidence in the royal treasury and sowing distrust among provincial bankers. It was not war in its traditional form. It was subversion executed with careful precision, aimed at eroding Eleanor's hard-won stability from within. In response, Eleanor convened her most trusted circle in the palace's subterranean war chambers, a windowless sanctum protected by thick stone walls and layers of armed guards. Around the polished oak table sat Lord Everwyn, whose counsel remained invaluable in navigating both diplomacy and domestic balance. Captain Hartwick, now elevated to High Marshal of the realm's forces. Lady Marlowe, a brilliant economist who had risen through the merchant councils, and of course Marcus, whose intelligence network had proven indispensable in exposing the Emperor's subtle invasions. Eleanor began, her voice firm, each word measured like the strokes of a master artisan carving marble. "The Emperor of Volstrania has shifted the battleground from our borders to our markets, from our armies to our merchants. If we continue to react as though this is a conventional war, we will find ourselves bleeding not from swords but from fractures within our own foundation." She paused, allowing her words to settle across the heavy chamber. We must adapt. We must build not only stronger armies but a stronger nation, resilient against every tactic seen and unseen. Lady Marlowe leaned forward, her ink-stained fingers clasped before her. We've begun strengthening the coin inspection bureaus and tightening the merchant licensing laws, but the counterfeit influx is highly organized. They're replicating even the minor minting imperfections. Someone on the inside of their royal mint must be collaborating. Captain Hartwick added gravely, "The mercenary encampments along the border grow bolder with each passing month. Our border guards are stretched thin, and any misstep could provoke a larger conflict." Marcus, his eyes scanning the unfolded maps, spoke with calm urgency. "We must strike at the roots of these networks without allowing Volstrania to provoke us into open war. If we can dismantle their funding webs, sever their smuggling lines, and expose their collaborators, we will not only cripple their current operations, but signal to the Emperor that Britannia cannot be weakened through cowardice and shadows." The plan that emerged was nothing short of a masterpiece of covert warfare. Specialized investigative bureaus were established, combining skilled magistrates, codebreakers, and economic auditors, tasked with tracking financial anomalies and tracing counterfeit currency back to its origins. The merchant guilds were incentivized to report suspicious trade activity, their loyalty secured not through fear but through shared prosperity. Simultaneously, small elite military units were deployed in secrecy to intercept and dismantle the mercenary cells operating near the eastern borders. These forces, known unofficially as the Silent Hand, operated under strict orders, swift, precise, and unseen. As weeks turned into months, the campaign unfolded with extraordinary effectiveness. Smuggling rings were dismantled, bribed officials arrested, and a wave of public trials exposed the foreign agents who had embedded themselves within Britannia's commercial and political infrastructure. Each successful operation struck like a scalpel, removing rot while preserving the body of the kingdom intact. The people watching these victories unfold grew only more loyal to Eleanor's leadership. Where King Darius's reign had been marred by corruption and fear, Eleanor's was becoming defined by its unwavering defense of justice and national integrity. But with each blow dealt to Volstrania's covert operations, the Emperor's frustration grew. His next move came not through military aggression but through political theater, a grand diplomatic summit to be held in the neutral territory of Eldros, a coastal kingdom famed for its independence and skilled arbitration between rival powers. Invitations were sent across the continent, and to the surprise of many, Eleanor herself was formally summoned to attend. The summit would gather the most powerful rulers and diplomats, offering a stage where alliances would be tested, accusations levied, and the fragile balance of power recalibrated before the watchful eyes of every major kingdom. The decision to attend was not made lightly. Lord Everwyn voiced the concern shared by many. "Your presence in Eldros will place you in proximity to every enemy who seeks to unseat you. Volstrania will not miss such an opportunity." But Eleanor, never one to retreat from confrontation, responded with measured determination. "That is precisely why I must go. To lead a realm is to face threats not only on the battlefield, but in every hall where power gathers. I will not hide from them." Preparations for the journey were elaborate. An elite security retinue, handpicked by Captain Hartwick, would accompany her alongside select members of her council. Marcus would travel not only as her chief intelligence officer, but also as her private envoy, tasked with gathering intelligence from the countless side conversations and secret dealings that would occur behind the summit's polished facades. Every detail of their appearance was calculated to send a message. Britannia was not a broken state clinging to survival. It was a rising power unafraid to take its place at the global table. When the royal caravan finally departed Avalon, the streets filled with onlookers waving banners of white and gold, their cheers rising into the warm summer air. Eleanor, seated within the gilded carriage trimmed with Britannian insignias, gazed out at her people with a sense of deep resolve. She had rebuilt this kingdom from the ashes of tyranny. She had withstood the assaults of foreign powers and internal conspiracies alike. But she knew well that the greatest test of her reign loomed just beyond the horizon of Eldros. Upon arrival, the capital of Eldros glistened beneath the sun, its towering sea cliffs lined with marble palaces and cascading terraces. Delegations from every corner of the continent had already arrived, their pavilions adorned with vibrant flags, their entourages brimming with diplomats, soldiers, and spies. The summit grounds themselves were a theater of veiled posturing, where every bow and every toast carried calculated meaning. Eleanor's entrance commanded immediate attention. As she strode through the central hall of the Grand Assembly, a vast rotunda crowned with glass domes, all eyes turned. She wore a gown of deep navy silk, embroidered with the silver crest of Britannia. Her head held high beneath a modest circlet that symbolized not the arrogance of unchecked monarchy, but the calm authority of earned rule. Her eyes met those of Emperor Gregor, who stood flanked by his advisors across the chamber. His smile was courteous, but the challenge within his gaze was unmistakable. The first salvos of this newest conflict would not be traded with swords or fleets, but with words, alliances, and the silent warfare of influence that would define the summit in Eldros. The marble floors of the Grand Assembly gleamed beneath Eleanor's steps as she advanced into the center of the vast circular chamber, where the leaders of dozens of realms had gathered. High above, stained glass ceilings refracted the afternoon sun into shafts of colored light that danced across the polished surfaces like moving banners of red, blue, and gold. The chamber echoed faintly with the rustle of silks, the soft murmur of whispered conversations, and the clink of jeweled rings tapping gently against goblets as nobles and envoys sized one another up. It was not a place of friendship. It was a battlefield dressed in the finery of diplomacy. Emperor Gregor stood across from Eleanor, his imposing frame draped in heavy Volstranian velvet, embroidered with black and crimson threads that glistened like fresh blood under the light. His counselors hovered close behind him like shadows, their expressions carved from stone. His eyes fixed on Eleanor with the cold amusement of a hunter regarding a rival predator who had wandered too close to his territory. As Eleanor took her designated seat at the circular high table, the other rulers followed, their collective movements a carefully choreographed dance of unspoken rivalries and fragile alliances. The first days of the summit unfolded with the expected pleasantries. Toasts were raised, grand feasts held beneath vaulted ceilings glittering with crystal chandeliers, and cultural exhibitions paraded before the assembled dignitaries in a display of pageantry designed to distract from the lethal negotiations occurring behind closed doors. But beneath the laughter and song, quiet meetings whispered of shifting borders, secret alliances, and promises made beneath the veil of night. Every word spoken was a blade disguised as a compliment, every agreement a potential snare. Eleanor navigated this treacherous terrain with the grace of a seasoned general. Her private meetings were calculated, each carefully selected alliance reinforced with mutual interest and long-term vision. Smaller kingdoms, those who had once feared being swallowed by either Volstrania's expansion or Britannia's turmoil, found in Eleanor an unexpected beacon of stability. Her vision for a collaborative league of independent states appealed to those who sought security without surrendering their sovereignty. Slowly, a quiet coalition of smaller realms formed around her, their subtle alignment a growing counterweight to Volstrania's ambition. Emperor Gregor, sensing the shift, grew bolder in his attempts to undermine her. During a grand banquet on the fifth evening, he raised his voice just enough to carry across the chamber while addressing Eleanor directly. Lady Regent, one cannot help but admire Britannia's resilience. To rise from such recent disorder is no small feat. The chamber hushed slightly, sensing the provocation beneath his smile. Though some say that such rapid rises often precede equally rapid falls, history has a tendency to punish those who grasp for crowns not their own. The veiled accusation of usurpation hung in the air like a drawn blade. All eyes shifted to Eleanor, awaiting her response. She allowed the silence to stretch for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle before answering in a voice both calm and resolute. "Your Imperial Majesty," she began, her tone measured like the stroke of a master archer drawing back a bowstring. "History indeed remembers many things, but it most honors those who serve not themselves, but their people. Britannia did not rise by accident, nor by ambition alone. We rose because the people demanded justice where there was tyranny, and stability where there was chaos. And as long as I draw breath, they shall not be abandoned again to any who would seek to fracture what we have rebuilt. The applause that followed was polite at first, but quickly swelled as her allies joined in, their voices sending a clear signal across the chamber. The lines of influence were no longer merely whispered, they were being drawn in plain sight. In the days that followed, Volstrania attempted one final maneuver. A secret delegation approached one of Britannia's provincial envoys with promises of personal wealth and autonomy in exchange for betraying the coalition's plans. But Marcus, ever vigilant, intercepted the plot, exposing the attempted bribery during a private tribunal arranged swiftly by Eleanor's counsel. The revelation humiliated the Volstranian delegation, stripping them of any remaining moral high ground before the summit's concluding assembly. When the final day arrived, the League Charter was signed, a formal agreement binding Britannia and a dozen smaller states into a defensive and economic alliance, unlike any seen before on the continent. The pact offered mutual protection, trade advantages, and cooperative development while preserving each state's sovereignty. Its mere existence dramatically shifted the balance of power, signaling to all that Britannia was no longer a kingdom recovering from civil strife, but a rising architect of a new political order. As the assembly dispersed and envoys prepared for departure, Eleanor stood once more on the palace balcony of Eldros, overlooking the bay where ships hoisted the banners of their departing nations. Marcus joined her quietly, his presence now as constant as the pulse of her own thoughts. "The Emperor returns home wounded, though not defeated," he observed softly. "Volstrania will not retreat forever." Eleanor nodded, her gaze steady on the horizon. "No, but we have bought Britannia time to grow stronger, to fortify what we've built, and when they return we will not face them alone." She paused, her voice quieter. "What we've done here is not only for us, Marcus. It's for every child in every village who will never know the weight of tyranny. That is the victory they cannot undo." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting its final amber glow across the sea, Marcus reached for her hand, this time not as a covert gesture, but as a quiet declaration shared between equals who had weathered every storm together. They stood there in silence, rulers not just of a nation, but of a destiny they had reshaped with courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable resolve. And though the future would bring its own storms for this moment, Britannia stood unbowed, its path forward forever altered by the unyielding will of the woman who had dared to rise where few believed it possible. And there you have it, my friends, a journey through the rise of Eleanor Augusta, a story of power, sacrifice, resilience, and a leader who rewrote the destiny of an entire realm. If you've made it this far, I want to personally thank you for diving into this incredible tale with me. These stories of strength and leadership across history and legend always remind us how much can be achieved when courage meets wisdom. Now, I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts down in the comments. What part of Eleanor's journey resonated most with you? What did you learn or feel while following her rise? And if you faced your own personal storms, your own moments of decision and courage, share your story with our amazing community. We're building something special here, and your voice is part of it. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and join us on this journey through the untold stories of history, power, and the people who dared to change the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and I'll see you in the next one.